in Kansas City. Tragedy befell the World Wrestling Federation and all of us. Owen Hart was set to make an entrance from the ceiling, and he fell from the ceiling. And I have the unfortunate responsibility to let everyone know that Owen Hart has died. Owen Hart has tragically died from that accident here tonight.
You know, even after 25 years, it never gets any easier to hear Jim Ross deliver that bone-chilling announcement to all of us on May 23rd, 1999, during Over the Edge, letting us all know that Owen Hart was indeed killed from the fall that he suffered from the rafters when he was making his entrance as the Blue Blazer. Wrestling has dealt with more tragedies than any other form of entertainment or sports in the world. Wrestlers dying young is a theme in our industry. Wrestlers dying before the age of 50, 40, 30, and many times even in their 20s is all too common throughout the business. We've dealt with it more times than we can even count. When you look at the list of names of wrestlers that died before the age of 50 and before the age of 40, it's a staggering list. The majority of those cases, these deaths were due to poor lifestyle choices, unhealthy lifestyles, and a ton of drug and alcohol addiction. Those are usually the culprits there to these deaths. Owen Hart died just a couple of weeks after his 34th birthday. And he died in one of the most tragic ways possible. A freak accident live on pay-per-view where he was going to be lowered from the ceiling. A stunt that WCW was in the habit of doing routinely with Sting and has been done before. And his harness detached. He fell some 90 feet right into the ring to his death. And I think what makes the Owen death cut so deep is because of what I mentioned earlier. All of those other deaths that we've experienced, a lot of those were the own doing of the person that died, their own choices. With Owen, not only did he not choose to have this happen to him, he was the complete opposite of many of the wrestlers, most of the wrestlers that passed away at a young age. Owen Hart's only goals and motivations in life were to be with his family and to make a living for his family. He was never going to develop the reputation of a Hulk Hogan or a Ric Flair, or maybe even an Undertaker or a Mick Foley if you really want to stretch it, in terms of people who really struggled with the decision to let go, who really struggled with the decision to retire, who wanted to come back, who couldn't let go of the limelight, that type of thing. Owen Hart, if he were alive today, I believe he would still be making plenty of appearances. I'm sure he would have done the Hall of Fame and turned up from time to time. But in terms of being an active wrestler into his 50s, like Chris Jericho and like a lot of other wrestlers that we're seeing right now, Owen Hart really never struck us as that type of wrestler. And I think he would have long since been out of the ring. As soon as Owen had enough money to be set for life, he was going to be done. And he was somebody who always had his priorities straight. He didn't do a lot of drinking or drugs or anything like that. He was just a family man that just wanted to go home and be with his family. That's it. And, when you think back to the circumstances of his death and how frustrating it was, because it feels like it was avoidable. It feels like in any other storyline that he might have been in, because he was doing that goofy Blue Blazer gimmick for some reason in 1999. If he would have just been Owen Hart, he would have walked right down the aisleway and hopped right in the ring and be alive today. So there's a lot of things to look back on and be frustrated about in terms of his death. People you can put blame on, Vince Russo and his decision and the creative decision and direction with Owen, plus the Montreal Screwjob that set a lot of this in motion a year and a half earlier. Had Bret Hart not left the WWE, I seriously doubt that a year later Owen Hart would be the Blue Blazer. So there are a lot of things to think about. Butterfly effect stuff, to where if you go back and say, oh man, if only that was different, or that was different, or that was different, Owen would still be here. And we've been doing this for 25 years. 25 years have gone by now, and I'm still not over this death. It's still extremely painful to think about because it was just one of the more unfair things. in pro wrestling. I used to think that Owen Hart's death was the biggest and going to be the biggest tragedy that wrestling ever suffered. Then Chris Benoit came around and showed me how foolish I was to think that. But in terms of, the scar that Owen's death left, how deep it cut, his just hurt worse than anyone else's in my mind. And it's a night that I remember very, very vividly. I'm going to talk about that. And I remember a lot of details about that night. We all remember details about where we were during significant moments in history. I remember where I was when the Challenger exploded. I was in 3rd grade, sitting on the rug, watching it on TV. I remember every detail about 9/11 and what I did that day. And I remember the night of Over the Edge 1999 and everything that happened that night. So I wanted to come back up here again because 5 years ago to the day, I released a 20th anniversary video on Owen Hart's death. And in that video, I had mentioned that I probably wasn't going to talk about Owen much anymore or highlight or chronicle his career or his death because we had done it so many times in the past. And I thought the 20th anniversary of his death was a good place to kind of put a cap on all of that, a little lid on all of that, cherry on top, so to speak. Well, now it's 25 years, and I wanted to come up and at least offer some updated opinions. I mean, my opinions haven't changed. All my thoughts and opinions about Owen Hart's career and his death have not changed at all. I stand by 1,000% everything I've said in the past about him. But since it now has been a quarter of a century since his passing, I wanted to come up and say a few words. I also want to let you guys know that this is going to be a charity stream. We are going to be making a donation to the Owen Hart Foundation. If you look down below in the bottom right of this video, next to the video title, there will be an option for a super thanks or a thanks. And you can send a donation right through there on this video. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to look at this video 2 weeks from now, 2 weeks from today. I'm going to check out the video, and I'm going to take all of the super thanks that we got and all of the ad revenue that this video has generated so far, and we're going to make a donation under the Good Mic Work family name to the Owen Hart Foundation. If you would like to donate directly to them and bypass this, you can do so by visiting the owenhartfoundation.org, and the link to that is in the description below. But we definitely want to make some sort of a donation to Owen Hart's foundation, the foundation that Martha Hart started after Owen's death. And it's a great charity that supports local and national and international communities through scholarships and housing and partnership programs. They have various foreign aid projects, food drives, children's hospital funds, holiday fundraisers, things like that. A lot of great projects that the Owen Hart Foundation oversees. And so we will be making a donation there to that charity in a couple of weeks. With any of the revenue that this video generates, we are sending 100% of it to the Owen Hart Foundation. But what we're going to do here today in terms of discussion, I don't have a whole lot of notes prepared for something like this. This is just going to be a casual chat about Owen Hart's career. And a lot of this, like I said, are things that you've heard me talk about before. But if you're new to the channel and you've never really heard me go in detail about Owen Hart, this would be a good opportunity for you to hear how important he was to me as a wrestling fan. Because as all of you know, who've been watching me for any length of time, my favorite wrestler of all time, and still is, Bret the Hitman Hart. I don't think I've ever had a wrestler that I've had a stronger connection with than him. He was my favorite growing up. He was my favorite as a teenager. He was my favorite into my 20s. And now that I'm an adult, I really don't have favorites anymore. And Bret is still, to this day, my guy. I've always had a fascination with his career and the Hart family because he comes from a long line of Harts, 12 kids, 8 brothers, 4 sisters. All 8 boys got into wrestling, and all 4 girls married wrestlers. Stu Hart, a famous promoter, of course, ran Stampede Wrestling and trained all of the Hart boys in his dungeon and trained a lot of the wrestlers that would go on to have huge careers and win world championships in pro wrestling for decades to come. The Hart family fingerprints are all over the business. And Owen Hart and Bret Hart, by far, were the best of the brothers. They were far superior than the rest of them. Some of them were good. Keith was good and Bruce was good. Some of them could wrestle and whatnot, but Bret and Owen really stood out. Bret, of course, was turned into a main eventer, first one to become world champion. Good smooth mat technician, and Owen had a lot of those attributes as well, but he could also fly. And Owen was probably the most athletic of all the Hart kids, more so than Bret. And he was the youngest. He was the, the baby of the family. And he, was kind of well protected in that sense growing up as a kid and stuff, and maybe, got to bypass some of the really gnarly stuff. But Owen was always just kind of beloved ever since he was a baby. And then when he got into wrestling as an adult and he turned out to be so good and he had a great look, and him and Bret just, they had the talent in that family for sure. And as we all know, the Hart family tree stretches far, with Bret and Owen's sisters marrying Jim the Anvil Neidhart and the British Bulldog, and that extended family that would be a huge part of WWE all throughout the 80s and into the 90s, and the Hart Foundation all the way up until Bret Hart leaving the company. So I've always had a huge fascination with the Hart family. Back in the day, around about a year before this, about a year before Owen's death, maybe even 2 years, I started getting into tape trading, started contacting people in magazines and pen paling with them, and setting up tape trades and whatnot. And I remember when I first started getting into that, the first set of tapes that I wanted to target and to try to find was Stampede Wrestling, primarily because I wanted Bret Hart and Owen Hart matches from Stampede. Bret had some killer matches with Dynamite in like the late 70s, early 80s in Stampede, when Dynamite was still real small and real kind of skinny, and the two of them would have these, I don't know, just these light heavyweight matches in Stampede that were just incredible to see them so young working in that at that level. I was blown away, and I wanted to get my hands on those matches. And I also wanted Owen Hart's body work from Stampede Wrestling, because he had a hell of a run there too, and feuded with lots of guys like Bad News Allen, and you were able to see a lot of Owen Hart's athleticism in those early days in Stampede. So when I first started getting tapes, that's what I went after first. Then I went after some Japanese wrestling and some Mexican wrestling, but Stampede was top priority to me. And I was able to acquire a lot of those tapes. I mean, they were grainy as hell, super, super grainy, but I have just about every Owen Hart match from Stampede from that time. And even though they're grainy and tough to watch, I have these memories of laying on my couch in my apartment, like in the winter time, with the lights out, 2:00 in the morning, watching old Stampede tapes, 21 degrees outside, middle of the night, and I'm inside, warm and cozy watching Stampede Wrestling. It's just a memory I have from, kind of the late 90s like that. And so the Hart family was extremely significant and important and influential to me as a wrestling fan. And because Bret Hart was my favorite, by default, I was going to love a lot of his family as well. And I didn't just blindly love them. I liked Owen a lot. I thought he was a tremendous wrestler, and I liked everyone associated with the Hart family. So a lot of those feelings about the Hart family and Bret Hart in general is another reason why I think Owen Hart's death really scarred me more than any other death. And I've mentioned several times that years later, when Eddie Guerrero passed away, and I saw the way the next generation was kind of reacting to Eddie's death, I really felt for them, because even though I was a huge Eddie fan, I've seen Eddie wrestle in person many times, huge Eddie Guerrero fan, loved him to death, and his death really rocked me and rocked me hard. I feel like Eddie's death was what Owen's death was like for me, for so many of those fans. A lot of fans really took Eddie's death hard. And when I kind of was observing a lot of that, it reminded me of what I was going through when Owen died, because I'm like, you got to be fucking kidding me. How does this happen? It was a lot of frustration. I swear I went through all the different stages, of grief there, and especially the frustration and denial about the whole thing, because what made Owen's death even more painful was what I talked about earlier, how this was a guy that had his priorities straight, that all he wanted to do was go home and make enough money to support his family, and that's it. Family was first, wrestling was second, and a lot of wrestlers, it was wrestling first, family second, and Owen just had a much better grip on that. But what was also so painful about the whole thing is that right in the middle of his death, they were moving into their new house. They had just purchased a new house. They were in transition, moving from their old home to their dream home that they built. And Owen Hart dies, while they have half their shit boxed up in one house and the other half boxed up in the other house. I mean, that's just some unfair life right there. And you feel for Martha. You feel for her. You feel for her family when she's told the story of how she got that phone call, because she's in Canada, Owen's in Kansas City. It's not like you can be told about this in person. You know, if your husband suffers a fatal fall or injury thousands and thousands of miles away, the only way to tell you this is over the phone. And she had to hear that doctor saying, I'm so sorry we have to tell you this. You know, your husband has passed away. And hear her kind of retell that, and just, you know, her slumping down in her chair, and, you know, the effect that that had on her and her family has never been the same. And that's why I've always said, I've always had Martha Hart's back. Throughout the years, there's always been talk about, should Owen Hart go into the Hall of Fame? A lot of fans have been mad at Martha Hart for not wanting Owen and Owen's name to be associated with WWE in any way. She blames them for what happened to him. There was a lawsuit there, you know, that she did receive a settlement for. And a lot of fans are, you know, I think really kind of short-sighted and inconsiderate when it comes to their critiques of Martha. Get over it already. Why doesn't she let Owen Hart go into the Hall of Fame? You're never going to be in that situation. You're not going to be able to understand where this woman is coming from. You know, because in this woman's mind, this is the company that killed her husband. He would be alive right now if they didn't make him go up there on that catwalk and come down with that entrance. And so if you are holding a company responsible for the death of your spouse, would you want to do business with them? No. You know, we have to respect Martha's stance here. Even if we don't agree with it, you're not Martha. You're not the one who lost your spouse. You have to try to put yourself in her shoes. And I think that Martha has the right to never want to do business with WWE again. Even if you disagree that she's maybe, you know, holding them too responsible, it was just an accident, which I do believe. WWE didn't purposely kill Owen. Of course it was an accident. Nobody wanted that to happen, and accidents do happen. But she is Owen's widow. She is his wife, and she has every right to hold a lifelong grudge against the company that took her husband away. And we as fans have got no business or no say in this matter at all. It's her decision, and as fans, we need to respect that. For Owen, if you love Owen as much as you say you do, you need to respect his family's decision. I understand that his death happened under extremely fucked up circumstances, and I'm not going to sit here and blame the family for any reaction they have to that death at all. As a fan, I am perfectly fine remembering Owen for the great wrestler that he was. I'm perfectly fine with remembering Owen for the hilarious personality that he had. I don't need him in the Hall of Fame to satisfy any wrestling fan closure that I might need. It's not necessary. It's not required for me. I understand that Owen Hart probably never will go into the Hall of Fame, and that's fine. He's a Hall of Famer in our hearts, and he definitely had the career that would warrant a Hall of Fame induction, but you just have to understand the circumstances of his death. Martha controls all that, and Martha does not want to do business with the WWE. That's the decision that she's made, and I believe that wrestling fans need to respect that decision. Now, Martha Hart has, in recent years, done business with AEW. They now have the Owen Hart Tournament once a year, and they have a charity that benefits the Owen Hart Foundation. I was proud to be in the building at Double or Nothing in 2022 in Vegas for the first Owen Hart Cup Finals that were won by Adam Cole and Britt Baker, and Martha Hart was there. And I had never seen Martha Hart in person before, and it felt good to be at my seat and watch her kind of give that speech. And, you know, after all these years, to be, you know, in a relatively chipper mood about all of this. You know, she seemed to really have a good time. She even kind of danced off stage. And just to see Martha happy, you know, because as we know, I don't think she ever remarried, and she really dedicated her life to preserving the memory of her husband. And, you know, I've always been worried in the back of my mind that she's led, you know, a life of 20 years of depression and whatnot. And while she never really did get over things, she really has done Owen Hart's name proud. You know, this is a great charity, and she's been highly involved in it for years. Her kids, you know, we did see them interviewed finally during the Owen Hart Dark Side of the Ring a couple of years ago, which I also released a video on. So to see her kids, her and Owen's kids grow up, to be well-adjusted, successful adults is something that I'm very happy to see. I know Owen would be very proud of those kids and what they've done with their lives, and they've all remained largely out of the pro wrestling spotlight. But AEW and Tony Khan reaching out to do business with Martha Hart to benefit the Owen Hart Foundation, I thought was really nice. It puts the Hart name, the Owen name, back associated with wrestling without having to be directly associated with the same company that killed him. And I think that the partnership has been great. It's been a lot of fun, and it's been fun seeing that Owen Hart tournament every year in AEW in memory of Owen. So it's nice that we have seen Martha kind of get back into the business a little bit, and Owen Hart's name being back associated with pro wrestling for the first time in a long time. But I think that's going to be about as good as it gets. I don't think she's ever going to do business with WWE again, and I can completely and totally understand that. And for those of you who are old enough to remember Owen Hart's death or were watching Over the Edge live that night, I think you'll agree with me, because hearing that announcement, having Jim Ross tell us and shock us that Owen Hart died, it was just gutting for a fan. So imagine what it was like for his family. That's just what I'm saying. Just try to put yourself in Martha's shoes, and you just have to respect her decision, whether you agree with it or not. You have to respect it, because imagine what we went through as fans hearing this news, and then what Martha had to go through and the emotional scarring and the life-changing and altering, situation that Owen's death thrust on her family. You cannot blame them if they're never going to get over it, because as a fan, I'm barely over it. I've told the story lots of times about the night of Over the Edge. I'd like to hear if any of you have memories of that night, what you remember of it. Put it in the comments below. Would love to hear your memories or your takes or your perspective from that night for those of you who are old enough. But for me, like I said, I was 22 years old. By this point, I was already in the habit of having friends over. Usually it was 2 or 3 of the same friends, and then sometimes outside people would come in. And that night we had a couple of extra people in my apartment, and I loved the apartment that I lived in during this time. I'm going to put a screenshot up here for you. This is the living room. This is where I was sitting the night Owen Hart died, right there on that blue couch. It's a good time to bully me if you want, because I've got a Stone Cold Steve Austin poster here. I've got WWF posters on the wall. I got bowling trophies up on my shelf there. This is a nerd's apartment. I somehow hooked up with like 3 different girls in this apartment. Don't ask me how they didn't run out of this place fleeing like a burning building when they see all this nerdy wrestling shit spread out everywhere, but they didn't. And this is where I was the night that Owen Hart died, watching right here on this big screen TV with a good half a dozen people in my house. I know my friend Jason was there, my buddy Daniel, who watched almost all of these pay-per-views with me, and he was the one that had a couple of friends join us. I don't recall their names, but I know one of them was like an EMT. I mean, right around this time, too, in May of 99, that was right when WWE hit that crazy rating. They got like an 8.3 or something in the ratings, just a bonkers number. Right around this time, heading into the higher power stuff and all of that. And they were crushing it. I mean, they were kicking WCW's ass, and wrestling really at the time felt like it couldn't get any better. Even though 1999 was not great for pay-per-views, I went to WrestleMania 15 and King of the Ring in 99, and they were both kind of bad shows. And this was just a couple of months after WrestleMania 15, but the ratings and the numbers were huge in the company at that time. And I remember having people over. We buy the pay-per-view, we start watching it, and like the first 2 matches or whatever it is, things are just flowing. It just has a good feel to it, a good vibe. We can tell it's going to be a good pay-per-view. The enthusiasm is high in the apartment, and we're all just sitting there chilling, having a good time until it comes time for the Godfather and Blue Blazer match. And they cut to the graphic on the screen for Godfather and Blue Blazer. And you can hear Jim Ross about to send us to the video package to, chronicle this issue between the two. And he's a little bit choppy in his talk. And he's like, "Oh, well, right now we're going to go to the video. We got big problems out here." and then boom, goes right to the video package. So I don't think any of us in the room heard Jim Ross say, we got big problems out here. If we did, it didn't register to anybody because we just kept on with our conversation. Then they start running through the video package. Owen Hart, I think there was an interview, a pre-tape with Kevin Kelly. And then I think they went into a little video package with Owen, drinking his milk and the Blue Blazer song and all this shit. Then the video package is over. We're back into the arena and the camera is focused right on Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler. And Jim Ross, this had just happened now. And Jim Ross is like, fans, I don't know what to tell you here. We were about to have the Godfather and Blue Blazer match. Owen Hart, Blue Blazer, as many of you know, is Owen Hart, was set to make an entrance from the ceiling. And he fell. Something went wrong. He fell into the ring. EMTs are here working on him. And I think he mentioned something about external heart massage. And that's when the fellow that was at my house, who's an EMT, saying, hey, that's not good, guys. That's not good. The massaging his heart is means bringing him back to life type of thing. They're performing chest compressions and whatnot on him. And they weren't showing any of this on camera. And it's a miracle that this did not get shown on air. Video does exist of Owen Hart's fall, but it's locked tight away in WWE's vault. Do not view or destroy. Nobody's ever able or allowed to see this thing again. And luckily, because the fans at home were watching a video package, we didn't see the fall. And they weren't showing Owen in the ring. They were just showing crowd shots. They were showing Lawler and Ross. Lawler had even gotten up and gone and looked. He wasn't when they first came back, it was just Jim Ross, I believe, not Lawler. Lawler had gotten up to go see what was going on over there. So it was just Jim Ross, updating us on what the deal is. And then Lawler comes in and sits down. And Lawler, you could see it on his face. Lawler's whole gimmick is just to be a fucking goofball. So when he sits down, he just goes, it doesn't look good at all. And I remember even then, we still had this vibe in the apartment that Owen Hart has been seriously injured. He's broken his leg. He's broken his back. None of us were really thinking that he's dead. It's just, I'm still viewing this at the time as an injury. So, but you can tell, they're trying to make it clear to the audience, this is not a wrestling storyline. That's why they weren't showing anything that was going on in the ring. They didn't want the fans to believe that this was an angle, because they might have. And then they get Owen out of there and they proceed with the show. Now, I think the next match is Jeff Jarrett's match. They wheel Owen to the back. Jeff Jarrett's got to do a backstage interview. He's crying. Deborah is crying. And then he's got to go out there for his match. And then they have a couple of other matches, I think, after that as well, where, before we heard any updates, I think maybe it was just one. I think it was the Jeff Jarrett match. And then after that, they had the match with the Union or whatever. That's when the camera is focused on Jerry Lawler and Jim Ross. And that's when Jim Ross informs us, and the soundbite that I played at the beginning of the video here, where he did have the unfortunate responsibility to let everyone know that Owen Hart has died. And I remember when he said that, it was just disbelief. Died? We just looked at each other. He said, died? Owen Hart died? I mean, as a 22-year-old, I hadn't experienced anything like that yet. Brian Pillman's death rocked me a little hard. So did Eddie Gilbert's. So did the Von Erichs. But nothing like this. Nothing right live on pay-per-view. How do you process that? How do the wrestlers process that? Much less the fans at home. So we're looking at each other in just complete disbelief. The air is just sucked out of the room. The energy is sucked out of the room. And what had started out as a great night, this is going to be a great pay-per-view. We got the beers open. We got snacks. Everything's phenomenal. And then the accident happens. And then Jim Ross informs us that Owen Hart has died. I have the original recording of this pay-per-view still, right off pay-per-view, complete with Sunday Night Heat and the whole deal. And just remembering how great the night was going, and how that abrupt tragedy just really hollowed me out almost. It was like I couldn't even fathom that something like this happened. Now, what's crazy is now WWE has found themselves in a situation where they have a decision to make. And the decision they made at the time was to continue the show, which I believe there was like 3 matches left. I think the Outlaws had their match. Rock and Triple H had to have a match. And then the main event was Undertaker and Stone Cold Steve Austin, where they had a title change planned for that night. And none of that had to be easy for those wrestlers who just heard that one of their peers, one of their brothers died, and now you have to go out to the ring and still perform. And in that main event match with Austin and Taker, they had a title change planned that night. So, you know, the fact that they couldn't postpone that or whatever, and later, you know, Vince McMahon and the WWE, their defense would be, well, we have an agreement and a contract with these pay-per-view providers to deliver a show. We would be in breach of contract if we stop the show. I think something would have been worked out there, because think about if something like that happened today, the show would absolutely be stopped. If Kevin Owens dies in the middle of a pay-per-view, you're not going to finish that pay-per-view. I don't know why I just happened to randomly mention Kevin Owens there, because Kevin Owens is named Kevin Owens after Owen, even named his son Owen after Owen. My friend Daniel, who was in the living room with us that night watching the show, also named his son Owen after Owen. Shout out to Daniel. Daniel, if you're watching, write down in the comments your memories of that night. What do I have right? What do I have wrong? Am I forgetting anything that happened that night? I'd like to know your take on this, or your memories of this, because it's kind of a blur. But I remember where I was sitting. I remember the position in the couch I was sitting at when all this happened. I remember the announcement and the feeling and the change in dynamic. But I might be forgetting another detail that I don't know about. I remember the next morning waking up and kind of being like, did that really fucking happen? Did that really happen? And I called a hotline. It was one of those hotlines you could call with an 800 number or 900 number in the magazine. And I don't know why, but I had the conscious thought to record it. And I held up a tape recorder to the phone and recorded the hotline report, 2 of them, 2 back-to-back days. And I posted them on my second channel. Just go to Good Mic Work 2 and look up Owen Hart hotline report, and you'll hear it and how just surreal it was. And I remember all day, because back then there's no internet, or at least I didn't have a computer to get on the internet in 1999 yet. I got a computer about 6 months later, but I didn't have one yet. So it's not like I could go online and try to find information. I was literally handcuffed. I was just sitting there dead. The only info I could get is whatever I was hearing from hotlines and phone numbers I was calling and whatnot, just trying to learn as much as I could. You know, then of course later on that night, Monday Night Raw holds that big, huge Owen tribute show, which is just so hard to watch because it was so much real, raw, genuine emotion from all of the talent. To see them all out lining the stage like that, the 10-bell salute, then all the wrestlers giving their comments, WWE offering to let people wrestle, but not forcing them to. If you want to go out and wrestle, say a few words about Owen, you're welcome to. I know The Rock said some things. Road Dogg and Godfather and anybody else who came out to the ring. Jeff Jarrett, same thing. Owen never was a nugget, and he would win the IC title like the following week, which is the belt, I guess, that Owen was supposed to win that night at Over the Edge. And even the very end, with Stone Cold coming out and giving a toast. He's a weird person to do that because of the pile driver and everything that happened between him and Owen Hart. But he was, the company's top star. So him being out there to offer that final toast one night after he loses his championship in one of the most unmemorable matches WWE's ever had. I've never gone back and watched that Austin and Undertaker match. I never will. I just don't want to watch Over the Edge ever at all for any reason. Watching everybody kind of get through that night, it was sad, and I know, some of the Hart family didn't like that show because they felt it was exploitive of Owen, and it was not. I don't think that at all. I think there was a lot of wrestlers and people in that company who knew and loved him and considered him a friend. That night was their grieving period too. You can't just completely discount all of them just because they happen to work for WWE. None of these people are guilty of Owen Hart's death. They loved Owen. Owen was their friend. And Owen traveled with these guys, shared hotel rooms and rental cars with them. They loved him. So it was kind of a grieving process for them the next night on Monday Night Raw. But man, that was a tough show to watch. A really, really tough show to watch and to get through, hearing Jim Ross kind of break down and cry at the end of it. I hope I can be as good a man as him so I can see him again one day. So heartbreaking to hear him deliver that line. He should have been traveling with everybody to the building the next night, dying the way he did, not dying of illness or drug overdose or dying when you're 10 years retired or something like that. He died in the middle of his run while he was an active star on the same night he was supposed to win a championship, all because creatively they had currently had him in this blue blazer gimmick, which I thought was completely silly. And that is another part of this story that's really, really frustrating. If Owen Hart had been making that ceiling entrance for 15 years and then just one night it goes badly, that might be different than the fact that they're putting him in a completely different costume and gimmick. If there's one guy that doesn't need a gimmick or costume, it's Owen Hart, and they stick him in one, and then he falls and this accident happens. It's why it can really make you mad and frustrated when you think back to the circumstances of Owen Hart's death, because he really, really fucking should be here right now. This should not have happened. But life is unfair, and life is about tragedy and pain. We all know that. But this one was just 25 years later, just feels like one of the most unfair kick in the balls that we've ever gotten as wrestling fans. And it's never gets easier to really think about or relive. You know what I mean? But as sad as all that was, and as tragic as Owen Hart's death was, he had a hell of a career, a fun career, a really fun career. We talked about how he was one of the many Hart brothers that grew up in Stu's dungeon and made his way through Stampede Wrestling and onto the WWE. He had a little different of a path than Bret did getting to the top, because when he first came in 1988, he was the Blue Blazer. They brought him in 88 and early 89 as the Blue Blazer, had a WrestleMania match with Mr. Perfect, but he was pretty much an underneath wrestler at the time. And I remember not knowing that Owen Hart was the Blue Blazer until later on, when Owen Hart resurfaced in WWE and formed the teams of High Energy with Coco Beware and the New Foundation with Jim Neidhart, and he was wearing the MC Hammer pants. Owen's, early runs there as the Blazer. Then when he left, and I think he, went to train to be a fireman, he wrestled a little bit internationally in Germany, and he even wrestled for WCW a couple of times. And that's when he was able to come back to the company in around 1991, and that's when he was teamed with Neidhart and Coco Beware, and he had that look, that high energy look to him with the very colorful outfit and whatnot, and he ran with that all the way into 1993, and we started approaching Survivor Series, and that's when they did the deal with Owen and Bret at the Survivor Series when they faced Shawn Michaels and the Knights, and the only Hart brother eliminated was Owen Hart, and they used that to begin a program between Bret and Owen, a brother versus brother program, which was a lot of fun back in the day, especially since Owen had done nothing up until this point of any significance, and now he's going to be involved in a pretty big storyline in WWE, feuding with Bret Hart. So they do the deal at the Survivor Series. Owen Hart gets mad, of course, and then over the holidays, they reconcile. The Hart brothers come back together for the holidays. They say their apologies. It's water under the bridge, and the Hart brothers then team up to challenge the Quebecers, of course, at the 1994 Royal Rumble, where they lose. And that's when Owen kicks Bret's leg out of his leg. Bret, of course, went on to then tie in the Royal Rumble with Lex Luger that then took him into WrestleMania 10. And because of that tie and the coin toss, Bret Hart and Owen Hart now have to wrestle at WrestleMania, and the two of them opened up WrestleMania 10. First match on the show in Madison Square Garden is probably my favorite Bret Hart and Owen Hart moment together, just in MSG, the entrances of both, the great technical wrestling match that both of them had. They had a great one too at SummerSlam in the cage, but this match in MSG just felt great as a Hart family fan to watch those two have this match on this night in this position on the card, and us getting the upset, the huge upset. And I've talked about WrestleMania 10 a lot. I just did a review on WrestleMania 10 just last month on my channel, so you can check that out. Maybe it's been 2 months now, but it's recent. Watching them have that match at WrestleMania 10 and with Owen getting the upset win was so great because this is a way to launch Owen Hart. He's beating Bret Hart. And then later on that night, Bret goes on to win the world title. And now, boom, you got your summer storyline between Bret Hart and Owen Hart. And that great moment at the end where Bret is celebrating with the title and Owen is in the aisleway and he's just looking. He's got that jealousy on his face. And then we would go into King of the Ring, 1994, the second King of the Ring pay-per-view now. Bret Hart winning the first one in 1993. And Owen Hart winning the next one in 1994, and that was the night that Jim Neidhart came back to the company, helped Owen win the King of the Ring and become the king, and that would take Owen into SummerSlam, where he would get his championship match against Bret Hart in the steel cage, the old blue bar steel cage, which I still love and miss. And it's one of my favorite cage matches, if not my favorite cage match of all time, even though it wasn't bloody. And a lot of the match was centered around these two guys, especially Owen attempting to escape the cage. It was still extremely fun, and there was a lot of story there, and there was a lot of Hart family members at ringside, including a returning British Bulldog that would get involved in that match as well. And of course, Bret Hart would retain the title. And he'd take it into Survivor Series where he would drop it to Bob Backlund when Owen Hart, in a great acting job, convincing his mother to throw in the towel on Bret. Please, Mom, I love Bret. Please save him. Please save him. She throws in the towel, costs Bret the title. Owen manipulated his own mother, bragged about it backstage after Bret lost the title. Great stuff from Owen Hart all throughout 1994. And then in 1995, he would finally get his hands on some gold, winning the championships at WrestleMania with Yokozuna, forming the Camp Cornette, and then teaming up with the British Bulldog. And the British Bulldog and Owen as a team were one of my favorite tag teams of all time because they were so entertaining. Not only were they both great in the ring and already had tag team championship track records with other partners, together they were so funny. And Owen, of course, as we know, is a world-class ribber. He's an ultimate prankster. Everybody loved Owen's personality because he was so funny, always playing pranks, always joking, never took anything seriously, was always out to have a good time. He was just like a big kid. And Davey Boy Smith was like that too. And the two of them together made for extremely entertaining TV. I remember on a Raw, I think it was a Raw in like 1997, Owen and Davey were out there with the Godwins and the LOD. And something happened with the slop bucket. Like the Godwins go to slop Owen and Davey, they duck. LOD gets the slop all over their bodies. And then we're backstage and Owen and Davey are watching the replay on the monitor. And they're like looking at the camera, begging the production truck, please show us again. Please show us for your tag team champions. And they just wanted to keep replaying the footage of LOD getting slopped, and just the image of Bulldog and Owen in the camera going, please play it. Oh, it's so fun. It's my fondest memories of those two. It's just the two of them together being goofy while also being strong, credible tag team champions. Both of these guys were very credible in-ring performers, yet still had personalities of being man-children. And I loved it because they were funny. They were so funny and so damn entertaining. And I loved the run with Davey and the Camp Cornette stuff. And Owen and Davey's alliance was always fun. And they stayed together, even though they nearly imploded there in 1997. They were brought back together by a heel-turning Bret the Hitman Hart. And one of my favorite moments in wrestling on Monday Night Raw was watching that in 97, watching Bret right after WrestleMania 13 come out and try to cool off Owen and Davey, who are now on at each other's throats. And after Owen and Bret had been feuding for years, all the bad blood there, for Bret now to go out and recruit some backup now that he's going to be a heel, forming the Hart Foundation and giving that very emotional speech to Owen and Davey and telling Owen how much he loved him, and kind of rubbing his head and bringing him in for a hug, and, just kind of hugging his brother and his brother-in-law, and then just kind of looking at that camera. It was just so great as a fan. I loved seeing these guys together. I didn't care Bret Hart was a heel. The fact that the family was coming together, forming the Hart Foundation with Bret and Davey and Owen and Neidhart and Pillman was a great time. Owen would then go on to beat The Rock for the Intercontinental Championship. on Monday Night Raw. And now you got gold all throughout that Hart Foundation faction. And Owen would have a fun run with the IC title, and a belt that he never got before, despite getting a couple of championship matches. Now finally being the Intercontinental Champion, holding that belt, it looked great on him. And he would carry that belt, as we know, into SummerSlam 1997, where another unfortunate situation would go down, and that was in the match between Stone Cold Steve Austin and Owen Hart. Owen Hart delivers a sit-down tombstone pile driver to Stone Cold Steve Austin, severely damaging his neck, damn near paralyzing him, and was a big reason why Austin's career ended early the way it did, was because of the compression and the injury that he suffered in that match. And we were lucky in that one that Austin wasn't killed. We were lucky that Austin wasn't permanently paralyzed. I think he was temporarily paralyzed, lost feeling in his arms and legs, and had to lay there for a couple of minutes in the ring. If something like this happened now, the match would just be stopped. But Austin was supposed to go over that night and win the championship. And there was a stipulation saying that if he didn't win the championship, then he was going to have to kiss Owen Hart's ass, like his lips on Owen's bare ass. So now you find yourself in a situation where, what do you do here? You got to try to get through this match. And that's when Austin rolled Owen up with the weakest little schoolboy in the history of the business. And it's one of the worst match finishes ever. And it's something that we would never see today. But Austin technically that night winning the Intercontinental Championship, but being severely injured in the process. And he was going to be out of the ring. He wasn't going to be cleared to wrestle for several months. He had to then forfeit the championship, which Owen Hart won back and held it until Steve Austin was healthy enough to come back at Survivor Series and win it back from him the same night as the Montreal Screwjob. So Owen, in 97, had quite the roller coaster of a year there, that started off great and then really, really ended badly, because not only did he injure Steve Austin, in between SummerSlam and Survivor Series, Brian Pillman passed away in St. Paul, Minnesota, died in a hotel room. And that was another one of those early wrestling deaths that the floodgates hadn't opened yet. And that was a crazy night, the night that Owen Hart died, because there was the night that Brian Pillman died, because there was a pay-per-view that night too. And then the next night on Raw, everybody was on the stage for the 10-bell salute. Hart Foundation, front and center. And Owen Hart won the Intercontinental title that night, I believe. That was the finals of the tournament, I believe, is when Owen Hart won. You had to go out there and wrestle knowing that somebody that you've known for many, many years is dead. And then we went into Survivor Series. He drops the belt back to Steve Austin. Bret Hart gets screwed later on that night. He's now out of the WWE along with all of the Hart Foundation members. But Vince McMahon did not want to let Owen Hart go. Apparently, Owen would have gone to WCW if he was allowed to. Vince let, obviously, Bret go, Davey go, and Neidhart go. And I was in the building for Neidhart's last night on that Raw in November of 97. But Owen was still there and under contract. He was just absent from TV. And I guess Vince did not want to let him go. He still thought there was youth and mileage in Owen, something that he could use. He gave Owen a pay raise and promised him a program with Shawn Michaels. And he came right out when he finally returned, I think the next month, attacking Shawn Michaels. And you thought it was going to be Owen, coming back to avenge what happened to Bret Hart. And I'm like, oh, this storyline might actually be pretty good. The Black Heart, the sole surviving Hart member. And Owen even did the deal in the ring with Vince where he kind of grabbed a hold of him. And you're like, oh, this might actually be pretty good. But then it wasn't. Nothing ever materialized there with him and Shawn. I know they had a match, but Owen never really came very close to winning the championship. And then he would feud with Triple H for the beginning part of 1998, taking that feud into WrestleMania for the European title and whatnot. But Owen pretty much lost any momentum he had when he came back in late 97 between then and WrestleMania. To the point that the next month at another show that I was in the arena for, I was there the night that Owen Hart turned heel and joined the Nation of Domination. It was a Raw taping, I believe, and it was the same set of tapings that DX invaded Nitro and that whole thing. So I was there for both of those shows, and I'm pretty sure this was a taping, I think, but I can't totally remember. And it might not have been. It might have been the night after Unforgiven. I forget which, but he snaps the leg of Ken Shamrock and he joins the Nation of Domination. And then he would start wearing that yellow road sign gear and be a member of the Nation, which I really liked. But again, even in the Nation, he wasn't doing a whole lot there other than, just a lot of tag team matches and whatnot. But he was an interesting addition to the Nation. And I always liked the fact that Owen found another family. He jumped from the Hart Foundation to the Nation, and that was kind of cool. Once that relationship ended, then they moved him into a tag team with Jeff Jarrett, and they did win the tag team championships. And that was another partnership that for whatever reason just didn't last very long. And around this same time was when Owen Hart started reappearing, of course, as the Blue Blazer. And they were trying to do the deal where it wasn't him and it was him, but we knew it was him, but he was trying to make it like it wasn't him. And they had some body doubles out there. I think one night they had a black Blue Blazer just to be funny. So there was some elements of comedy to the Blue Blazer gimmick, but as an Owen Hart fan, it really wasn't doing it for me. And then we go into Over the Edge. He's going to face the Godfather for the Intercontinental title. And that, of course, is where his tragic accident takes place. And we lost Owen. But it's hard to not wonder and speculate what life might have been like had Owen Hart never been told to resurrect the Blue Blazer gimmick. If they would have never done this and just kept him Owen Hart or moved him into a different storyline or a different direction, I do think there was going to be some sort of an affair situation going on with Deborah and Owen and Jarrett, and maybe Owen didn't want to do that, and the Blue Blazer was what they had come up with instead of that. Whatever the case was, doing the Blue Blazer gimmick in general was stupid. And it's hard not to be bitter about it. It's hard not to be upset about it. But, at the end of the day, his death was an accident, but you just have to wonder if he wasn't in this particular gimmick, what the future for Owen Hart would have been. And it would have been a lot different. And I think that's the toughest part of this whole thing to swallow, because it was a needless death. It was an avoidable death. And I feel like a dozen things going differently would have changed the fate of Owen Hart, and he'd be here today. And I think that's what's hard, is that you can't go back and change anything. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just the reality, and it's the way it is. But it sucks, because Owen Hart shouldn't have died. He should not have died that night in Kemper Arena. And it's sad. It's really sad. For me as a fan, Owen Hart's memory lives as strong as it ever has. Owen Hart will never be forgotten. If you're young and you're not familiar with Owen Hart's work, just watch some of his stuff. It's not hard to find. Go watch yourself some Owen Hart matches. Go down an Owen Hart rabbit hole and just watch. You'll see. You'll see. He's got some gems out there, man. He's a good wrestler. He was tremendous in the ring. He was hilarious, on the microphone, and his personality, and a lot of things that he would say, kick your leg out of your leg, and cutting the promo at WrestleMania with the big loogie on his chin. Those are all things that make Owen who he is to me. Those are all things that I'll always remember very fondly about Owen Hart. And even though it's been 25 years since his passing, even though his passing is still extremely sad and cuts deep, and it's one that we're never going to forget, I think it's important to remember how great of a wrestler Owen Hart was. I think it's important to celebrate his body of work, his career, because it really, really was a great one, despite the fact that this guy put his family first and his family was his top priority. He still achieved a lot of success and was a very, very decorated wrestler, won lots of championships, wrestled internationally, well-traveled, and beloved. I mean, it's a shame that him and Steve Austin did have that little bit of a personal issue stemming from the pile driver. But other than that, Owen Hart has received nothing but praise from his peers. People who shared and spent time with him have always spoke about Owen lovingly and warmly, and usually sharing a hilarious story or two when it comes to Owen. I think my favorite story, I think, was when the one that Brett told at the Hall of Fame, where I guess they're all the wrestlers are checking into a hotel. They're all in the lobby, but and Owen's there. And I guess Hacksaw Jim Duggan had already gotten to the hotel and he was already up in his room. Well, he phones down to the front desk when all the wrestlers are down there to ask the guy at the front desk, like, where the gym is. And so the guy at the front desk like puts his hand over the phone. He goes, "Hey, anybody know where the gym is?" And Owen's like, "Give me the phone." And he gets on the phone with Hacksaw and he goes, "Where's the gym?" And he goes, "Why don't you look it up yourself, you lazy bastard? You know, if you're so big and tough, why don't you come down here to the front desk and do something about it?" And then Owen hands the phone back to the guy. He's like, "Don't do this to me." Just stories like that Owen would be able to, he could like rib on a dime. You know, if he sees an opportunity, no hesitation, boom, we're going to rib this guy. I never get tired of hearing stories like that. You know, shoot interviews, podcasts. To this day, if somebody's got some fun anecdote about Owen Hart, it's always such a pleasure to listen to because it will never not make you chuckle. The dude was hilarious. He was absolutely hilarious. So there's the circumstances of his death, and his death, of course, are extremely tragic, extremely sad, extremely frustrating. But Owen was a tremendous man. He was a tremendous man. He was a tremendous wrestler, and he was a hilarious person. And he was loved and beloved by everyone nearly that he came into contact with. And he's still missed to this day, 25 years later. But I would love it. I would absolutely love it if you guys would share your memories of Owen Hart down in the comments below. What do you remember of his career? Are you old enough to remember his career? Are you too young to remember his career and you've just started learning about his career? If you have anything like that interesting to tell me about Owen Hart, I really want to hear about it in the comments. And let's tribute Owen down below. Let me know your memories, your thoughts, and about how you feel his death has been handled over the past 25 years. Would love to hear you guys break that down for me in the comments below. But I want to come up here today and just give you guys some updated thoughts on the career, life, and death of Owen Hart. And I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me and listening to me ramble. I really, really appreciate it. Owen was one of my favorites, and he is sorely, sorely missed. I really appreciate you guys being here with me this afternoon to take this very, very painful trip down memory lane. Thank you very much for listening, and I will talk to you soon. Long live Owen Hart. Peace.